Hey, brother, welcome to another lesson in the renewed masculine man. In this lesson, I want to talk to you about something I affectionately, for lack of a better word, call pseudo elevation. And to talk about pseudo elevation, I want to draw your attention back into an earlier chapter from the RMM course where we talked about king, warrior, magician, lover, and specifically about what are called shadows in the king, warrior, magician, lover. Now, you remember those that on each side of the primary four masculine archetypes, lover, magician, king, and warrior, there are these shadows, and there's an explosive side of these shadows that you see at the top of your screen here, and then there's these collapsing or weak kind of shadows that you see below. And the reason I wanted to draw your attention to this and its relationship to pseudo-elevation is because there's a lot of messages out there on the internet and the world that would identify themselves as men's work that are ultimately just what I would call shadow flipping. And what I mean by this is that this is where a man identifies himself to be in this collapsing side of those shadows, those weak areas at the bottom. And then what he does is he flips to the explosive counterpart of that same archetype. He actually bypasses the archetypes in the process. And so maybe he feels, a common one is in king energy, he feels like a weakling. And he just kind of has enough, and he flips from a weakling to a tyrant. He never actually experiences king energy. And he might not even feel warrior energy and magician energy and lover energy. Instead, he just moves from this collapsing, weak, kind of meek side of the ego into explosive sides. And this is just a change in behavior. It's not a change in being. And many men out there end up mistaking this kind of a flip or change because it's a pretty big shift, as changing from being a beta male to an alpha male. And in fact, I think if you see people talking about I'm an alpha, blah, 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 they're probably in this space, because I don't think people that genuinely have the attributes of what some would call a beta male feel the need to talk about it extensively in public formats. But nevertheless, that's just something I would draw your attention to. And what's happening here is that these men have mistaken their journey from meekness and aggression, or to aggression, as growth and maturity. And it's understandable why, because a man, if he's only ever lived in that collapsing energy, that meek, that kind of hiding, the feeling like he doesn't have any strength, to suddenly feel like your sense of aggression, your sense of intolerance, these things, they can feel like such a big shift that it can feel like growth and maturity. But it's really just exchanging one part of the ego to the other. And I would go so far as to say these men are not necessarily alpha males. They're just angry instead of meek and mopey. Now, who do you think they tend to be angry toward the most? Well, if you spend any time surfing the internet, it's not hard to see. It's primarily females. And the reason they're so angry at females is because in many of their stories as men, the female is the villain who has been depriving them of things they want, things like sexual experience, things like attention, things like validation, things like respect and honor. All these great things that men want to feel, they oftentimes have been trying to get from females, who, by the way, can't give men those things in any meaningful measure. And when a man doesn't know how to live in this space, he starts to see the female in his story, or all females, as villains. And I believe this results in a lot of very toxic behavior in men towards not just women, but culture in general. And then thinking that they've become a real man, right, because they're no longer feeling meek and mopey, they've really missed the opportunity to truly become their best selves. And that's because this kind of flip takes place within the ego or the brain, like I mentioned. In reality, true growth for men, it doesn't happen in an ego. It's something that we would say takes place in the heart. Now, when I say heart here, I don't necessarily mean the organ of the heart. I mean the conscious center of your being. Some people might call that a spirit if you're from a tradition like that. Some people are uncomfortable with the word spirit. I don't think it matters, but we use the word heart and spirit and consciousness interchangeably. Whereas your ego is really an artifact that the brain creates slowly, beginning in childhood and through the rest of your days. And if you mistake these two parts of yourself, you can be a very confused man, very confused individual, and you're generally not going to flourish in your masculine journey. So being angry and aloof and distant and aggressive and manipulative might really net you some new sexual experiences. It might net you some change in quantity, especially if you've been a man who's feeling very meek and humble and lowly, and suddenly you no longer feel those ways and you feel a little bit more aggressive and assertive. You're probably going to have more and deeper sexual experiences than you've ever had. And I think it would be a mistake to credit this as a sign of growth. You're really just experiencing, again, a shift inside of you, and it'd be easy for a lot of men to see this as positive, but it doesn't necessarily mean that growth has taken place. Because that same shift is not an effective path out of suffering or towards fullness as a mature masculine man. In fact, what we find in our conversations with hundreds of men around the world is that it's often a path to even more shame and even more increased emotional suffering. That's because it's entirely based, generally, on comparison with other people, comparison with other men. It's based on this idea of I need to be better than others, right? But needing to be better than others is not being an alpha. That's just straight up insecurity. And in fact, if people oftentimes use this language of alpha and beta and all this stuff because they're deeply insecure, because they need a way to label themselves on quote unquote the winning team, right? I don't find it particularly helpful. I think alpha and beta personally is just the language of comparison, and comparison is the language of insecurity. So let me describe the life of a man who's caught up in this ego-centered way of living. I want to use some graphics for that, right? All right, so here we have this guy in the middle. This is man, and he is suffering deeply from feelings of being done unto by others. He feels like he's deprived, and he feels like it's because everyone around him is not really making the way for him. This is a guy caught in these collapsing shadows. This is typically the guy who will either self-identify or others will call a beta or having beta behaviors. Now, to the right and left at the bottom are these things this guy wants to be living, but he sees them as generally inaccessible because these things are in his way, right? Now, I have just a few of them here, like society, wife, others, boss. You could put girlfriend in here. You could put parents. You could put other things. But this guy feels like he's essentially in a hole, right? And he's under the belief that other people are keeping him from feeling good and making him look bad, right? And so the people to the right and left of him are in his way from the life that he wants, right? And so he uses speech like abuse and neglect, and he uses terms in his life like I'm overlooked and prevented. And it's not a pleasant way to live, right? He believes that every action and behavior of others that elicits any sort of hard or difficult emotion within himself is intentional. And so he starts seeing all this with quite a nasty view. And it's not fun, right? Okay, so he feels abused. He feels deprived. And he tends to take everything very personally. And so personally, he just won't let go of focusing on others. In his mind, he can't have true happiness until others change and end their abuse, or unless he ends his relationship with them, right? He walks around kind of with his internal posture of saying things like, when will they stop abusing me? These people are depriving me of my needs. And he lives in this energy that is just focused on these pillars to the left and right of his existence. And remember, they're all blocking his true happiness. Now, along comes a lot of men's work, a common path in men's work, and one of many well-being friends, even some professionals like coaches, therapists, counselors, and their general approach and a common approach is to lower the man's view of those whom he perceives have put him in this hole, right? And it looks visually a little bit like this. Oh, well, if we can just lower, life and society and others and boss, now I feel empowered. And this guy walks around with this idea, right? I can finally have the life I want. I can finally pursue happiness. And it's this guy oftentimes in his growth that is experiencing this explosive shadow. See, he had to put himself above others. And in doing so, he's even given himself a lot of times this idea that he's an alpha male by doing that. And now he gets this perception of being elevated out of the hole that he used to be in. In his mind, like I said, he's no longer a beta male. He's an alpha male because he doesn't feel weak and meek and afraid and suppressed. He doesn't sense any longer these pillars to the left or the right of him that are blocking him. But all he's really done is flipped from the collapsing side of his ego to the explosive side. But in reality, he had very little, if any, net change in his true elevation. In fact, I think you could argue that he actually lost elevation at a human consciousness and evolution kind of way. He's experienced a feeling of gain, but he did that by lowering the value and worth and significance of the people that he used to think were standing in his way, right? And because he perceived them to be villains who are responsible for his painful emotions. And so he feels quite justified in lowering his perception and view of those people. This is not effective men's work, in fact, but it's what I would call smoke and mirrors. It's a complete charade that gives a man an illusion of a change in elevation, right? I don't know if you've ever done, there's an experiment I remember doing as a kid, or kind of like a fun neighborhood game where we would blindfold somebody and we'd have them sit or stand on a 2x4 and or like a plank of lumber. And we would tell them to put their hand on one of our heads, and two other people would lift that plank like an inch off the ground. And while they were doing that, the person whose hands were on their heads would like crouch down. And when you're blindfolded, it feels like you're being lifted up in the air on this plank. But what's happening in real life is the person who's got their hand on your head is just squatting down. In fact, it's kind of terrifying. People believe they're being lifted way up, and then one of the kind of fun parts about this game is you start shaking the plank, and people feel like they're going to fall like from 6 or 8 feet, but they're really just, like an inch off the ground. And it's the same kind of thing with this kind of men's work, and give you a feeling that you're elevated, that you're better. But it's not. It's just an illusion. Living a life of anger and animosity for others is not being an alpha male. It's just boyish immaturity. And I'm not saying that to try to shame anybody. I'm saying that to be sober, to be as provocative and upward calling as possible to men, because this doesn't even feel good for those men. It will kind of feel like an improvement, but if a man is truly honest with himself and asks himself, like, is this really what I want? It doesn't feel good. There's a lot of hard things going on. There's a lot of sense of victimization that's still at work in this man's life. And it requires feeling superior to others by making everyone else inferior. Now, with 8 billion people on the planet, I want you to do some math here. How many people do you need to feel superior to before you can actually stop feeling inferior? And if that wasn't bad enough, that's just the 8 billion people alive today. To really know that you're actually among the top, you'd have to know that you're better than 105 billion humans that have lived. And so this gets kind of ridiculous after a while, because how does one know that they're superior to 105 billion people? What kind of arrogance do you need to put on every day to believe that you're, by comparison, better? And so what we find with men when we meet them in this kind of story is they're feeling overwhelmed. They're feeling like their whole life is this pursuit of trying to outdo everyone. They tend to be overachievers. And in the midst of all of that striving and achieving, what they're finding is they have no more respect than they did before. People don't seem to love and appreciate them anymore. They still find people generally unwilling and unattracted to romantic relationships for the long term. And so these men just continue to suffer. So clearly, this does not work. Now, a tall tale sign that this is going on in a man is that even though he's made this flipped, he has an ongoing emotional and mental fixation on others. This guy, despite what's going on, is generally given a lot of mental and emotional bandwidth to what are others thinking? How are people perceiving me? And he's just thinking constantly about things and people outside of himself. Because remember, he's a guy that takes things very personally. And when you take things very personally, you have to be concerned about what every other person is thinking about you. And so if you're watching this and you find yourself saying, man, that's me, I give a lot of energy to what others think about me, you're living as an insecure man. And again, I don't say that to shame you, but to wake you up to something, that there's an opportunity here for a better way to be in the world. Now, when we say this stuff, we're sometimes accused of trying to lower the standard of what constitutes abusive. And some people think that we believe and teach that we're like letting women off the hook, right? And they say that stuff because they believe that we're trying to raise the bar so high, and that really women can do no wrong. And that's really a misunderstanding. We've also been accused of believing that it's always a man's fault and that a female partner, like I said, can do no wrong. We've even been called beta by some angry men from our unwillingness to live like they do as angry victims, which I find this really kind of an interesting thing. So when I'm unwilling, or people in our community are unwilling to be angry victims who have an obsession about what other people are doing, somehow we're weak. And I find this really an incongruent but also a very mysterious way to think. And like I said, it's really an unfortunate misunderstanding of our community, our culture, and our core message. It's not what we believe, and it's not how we guide men. And those accusations are actually another way that these same kind of men express their feelings of being done unto by another person. In this case, they feel done unto by hearing a message like ours that says, stop focusing on women, stop focusing on others. They see that as hurtful, as harmful. And I get it. I lived for like 20 years thinking that every problem I had was from people outside of me. I would not have appreciated the message my partners and other mentors on mentoring men have. I would have thought the same things, and I did. And it was not until someone sobered me up to some of these things that I could hear them. But this way of being requires these guys to lower their view of us also, because you have to. It's the only way you can feel good, is to lower your view of people who have a different message than you. So if I feel something, I feel done unto, I have to lower the view of you in order to feel good, because I don't know how to be okay on my own without that comparison. And because, like I said, our ideas are another form of abuse and deprivation, causing this man hurt and pain. And so he needs to lower the view of everyone else, including us, to experience relief from that pain. That's just plain old immaturity. All that is built on a foundation of dependency on others and low regard for self. Now, I can say that because we work with hundreds of men around the world, and we find these common denominators, that their true issue, the true thing they're struggling with, is they have a dependency for their sense of well-being that's rooted outside of themselves. And the reason they root that dependency outside of themselves is because at their core, they actually have a pretty low regard for self, or what I would call a conditional regard for themselves that's based on how well they're comparing to one another. And that looks like $1 million until you meet a man that you're like, man, that guy is pretty stellar. And this guy, if the kind of man I'm talking about, when he meets someone who he's just really impressed by, his view of self tanks because he's comparing himself with that man and feeling the shame of coming up short. And that is all rooted in a low regard, a low view of self, and on what we call an external locus of control. Now, an external locus of control, if you remember from prior lessons, means that you believe that the answers to what you need or to your suffering and happiness are outside of you. Now, what is it we actually do? What we actually do is show men how to entirely stop looking at what others are doing, right? We want to end this entire narrative in general. We show men how to stop judging, how to stop taking things that people do so personally, and how to stop needing others to be lower in order to feel elevated. And instead, we show men how to experience true elevation, right? A man's deepest need is not to put others down, it's to overcome himself, and specifically to overcome his shame, the self-limiting beliefs that makes him feel like he's unqualified to be great. And until then, the only way he can thrive is by this endless comparison and judgment of both himself and others. And we help men to stop that, to put an end to that. Now, a man will not effectively do that until he stops using that shame-based system that we're talking about, one that's focused on judging and comparisons with other people, right? He needs to put away this concept that he's feeling bad because of abuse. And instead, he needs to embrace something else, something deeper and more significant that says, I'm feeling bad because of stories I have about myself, stories I have about what the actions and behaviors of other people mean. And when we do that, this man elevates himself. It doesn't matter what's going on around him. He learns how to live on an entirely different plane that brings a lot of great things, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, this shift is the basis for a total transformation, and a transformation that is not stuck waiting for changes in others. That is a dead end. When you need other people to change, you just fixate on them and you're waiting for them to change. And you're like, when are they going to change? And you're delaying your own sense of well-being, your own sense of life, your own vigor while you're waiting for someone else to change. Let me tell you really plainly, if you're waiting for someone else to change to be happy, it means they own your happiness, not you. Does that sound like a good idea? Does that sound like a way to have a great life? To have someone else own your future, own your happiness, own your sense of well-being? Does that sound like an alpha male to you? I don't think so. So it's not the way to live the life you want. And before a man can have an entirely new experience of his life, he has got to move out of this system of thinking. The men we guide to experience transformation routinely tell us that everyone is treating them entirely different and better. And they are. This isn't just smoke and mirrors. This is people tell us all the time, hey, I elevated my sense of self. And you know what? People around me seem to elevate their sense of me too. And I didn't have to beg and plead. I didn't have to wait. I just got busy with my own work. I got busy focusing on my own life. And others around me changed their perspective of me. And we hear this on a daily basis in our community. And that's because people want to be around mature, self-reliant, open-hearted, and heroic men. Men who are free of blame and judgment of others. Now, does that sound like an empowering idea? Does that sound somehow limiting? Do you hear any slavery in there? Do you hear any suffering in what I'm saying? Or does it sound like freedom? Now, let me just jump on something because people always accuse us of this too. Are we saying that men aren't abused? No, we're not saying that men aren't abused. Whether or not a man is abused, however, is a judgment that we as a community don't believe is anyone's judgment to make but his. And so we don't believe we're doing men any kind of favor by saying, oh yeah, you're definitely abused. What basis would we do that on, right? And so rather than focus on helping a men make such judgments, because they're fully capable of that themselves, instead we guide him specifically towards a life of freedom and power and agency and clarity. Because from there, from those things, he's best equipped to live with unshakable self-worth, unflinching values as a man of integrity. And men that have that have clear personal boundaries. And men that live in this way in no way abide abuse in their lives. So in conclusion, don't get sidetracked into paths of personal development and men's work that are going to lead you towards this pseudo elevation. They are legion out there. They are many, and they're just going to hoodwink you into more suffering. Instead, pursue transformation. Transformation is harder, deeper work, and fewer people are really engaged in it, right? But transformation means a life that's lived from a transformed heart and a transformed mind. Specifically, a mind that isn't stuck waiting for others to change, but a heart and mind that are free from other people needing to change. Hey, thanks for watching that brief lesson from our Renewed Masculine Man group mentoring experience and curriculum. That was just one of hundreds of hours of lessons in that 6-month journey. If we have piqued your curiosity about the work we do, about pseudo elevation, about having an open heart and renewing in these kinds of ways, we would love to talk to you more about that. And so what I want to do is invite you to scroll down below this video and look for a link that you can click on to set up a free one-on-one session. In that session, you'll talk to myself or another one of the mentors on our platform. We'll have a face-to-face, connecting, open-hearted conversation with you. We'll hear more about what's going on in your life. How have you come to be this place? What's working for you? What's not working for you? We're not going to give you any kind of like sales pitch. We're going to answer your questions, talk to you about just our journey as men, and hopefully give you some hope and encouragement and some support on your journey. You can set that call up by just scrolling down, clicking the link, and you'll get on our calendar pretty quickly. Until then, it's been nice being with you. Thanks for listening to our content. I hope to see you on the other side of this camera sometime. Until then, have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Take care.